Hello there, and welcome to episode 3 of Your Podcast Girl. This is your host, Kinsey Roberts, and you are listening to the show for women in podcasting. Whether you already have your own show or you've been dreaming of starting one, you are in the right place. This show is really dedicated to women who want to create a podcast that supports their business, their career, or their passion project. You're interested in using your podcast as a marketing tool, as part of a lead generation arm of your business. But if those don't sound like you, you are 100% still welcome here, and I'm glad that you're here. We are talking today about 5 podcast tools that I don't think you need to waste your money on when you're just getting started. And in fact, I think you can go a long time in podcasting without most of these tools. Some of them you definitely are going to want to invest in the future once you realize or once you have found that your podcast is a great fit for your business, for your career, or why ever you started it. But in the beginning, it's just a test, right? So we don't want to throw a bunch of money at something if we don't know that we're going to stick with it 100%. So I like to teach my students that they should start kind of bare bones, get it out, make it sound great. But other than that, don't invest a bunch of money in a bunch of tools you don't need. So let's talk about what those 5 tools are. Number 1 tool you do not need when starting a podcast is an extremely expensive microphone. You can get microphones that are $600, $800, $1,000. A couple that I'm thinking right now, one of them is called a Heil PR30. There's a Heil PR40. There's a Rode mic. These are all hundreds and hundreds of dollars, anywhere between $600 and $700. And that amount of money is just really not necessary to spend on a quality sounding podcast, particularly, and I'm going to get to this in a second, but particularly if you are someone who is outsourcing the editing of your show from the beginning, just a basic good mic will do the trick because your editing will really help you. Now, that's not to say that you should be using the microphone that comes with your earbuds from your Apple device and recording in a room with wood floors and a high ceiling. That's not what I'm saying. So don't hear what I'm not saying. What I am saying is that you can get an inexpensive mic for, under $100 that's definitely going to do the trick for you. I personally use an ATR 2100. It is $80 and it's an amazing microphone. And I've been podcasting for 3 years and I didn't start out with this microphone. I actually started out with a microphone that was $120, so more expensive, but I don't think it was better. I don't think because it was more money that it was better than the ATR that I use now. I will put all of these microphones in the show notes of this podcast so you can take a look at them and definitely decide for yourself. But I do not think you need an expensive microphone. Get an ATR 2100. It's under $100. Get started with your podcast and don't let the cost of your microphone hold you back. Number 2 tool that you don't need when you're just starting out podcasting is a mixer. A mixer is not necessarily expensive, and I know that the expense of things is relative to your situation, but it's in general. It's not a very expensive tool. You can get one for $100, maybe less, maybe more, but the reason I don't think my students need it and the reason I don't recommend it for you is because it just adds a level of complexity that you really don't need for a successful podcast. It's not necessary to have a mixer. It doesn't equal a successful podcast, it doesn't equal a better sounding podcast. Again, if you have an editor or if you have a good quality microphone, if you are in a room that has nice acoustics like your closet. I know that sounds funny, but it's a great place to record podcasts because of all the clothes hanging up. You don't need a mixer. It adds a level of complexity that you don't need, and having that level of complexity may hold you back from hitting publish on your show, and I don't want that for you. Number 3 is a really expensive hosting plan with your podcast host. You can choose from a variety of hosting packages. Like for instance, the hosting company I use that hosts my audio files so that my podcast can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and those types is called Libsyn. Libsyn.com. I'll put them in the show notes. They're my favorite. I think everyone should use them. They are the best of the best in the industry, in my opinion. And they have a variety of plans that you can choose from. But what's great about Libsyn is that you can upgrade as you go. So if you have grand plans to publish 5 episodes per week and you think you need the most expensive hosting plan and you're going to pay $150 a month, I would just encourage you to kind of walk that back a little bit and really strategically devise a plan for how much content you can realistically produce that's going to be quality content for your podcast audience, and get a plan that is equal to what you decide is good for your audience. When a person will tell me that they want to podcast 3 to 4 to 5 times a week, I caution them a little bit, especially if they have other things on their plate, which they almost always do, because again, my students are really starting podcasts to support their businesses, to be lead generation tools, to be marketing tools. So they almost certainly always have something else on their plate. And starting out with a commitment of 1 episode per week, in my opinion, is a great commitment because you can always increase. And for me, I feel like it's better to increase than to decrease. Not that either one is really bad. It doesn't mean you can't have a successful show, but it's easier, right? It's easier to say, hey, listeners, I have a great surprise for you. You've asked for it. Now I'm increasing from 1 time a week to 2 times a week, rather than saying, oh, I know you guys really like 3 times a week, but I just can't hack it anymore and I have to go down to 1. Again, don't feel bad about doing that, please. It's just, might make it easier on yourself in the beginning. So I don't think you need an expensive hosting plan. Don't plan more content than you can really deliver on. Start with 1 episode a week, and that will really put you in an average hosting plan. It might be $15, maybe $20 a month. The great thing with Libsyn is you can increase or decrease your plan anytime. I've gone from a $40 plan to a $20 plan and then back to a $40 plan when I started producing more content on my main podcast. It's called She Creates Business. So it's okay to make those decisions and just make sure you have a hosting plan, that you're not locked into a certain monthly plan, and that you can make those changes. And Libsyn does allow you to make those changes on a monthly basis, which I really, really love that flexibility. If you are new to podcasting and you're joining me in this episode, a very basic explanation of a hosting plan is where your podcast audio file lives online so that people can listen to it in iTunes. That's very basic. That's what Libsyn is. That's what all podcast hosting plans are. And I said iTunes/Apple Podcast because it still is the most popular, but I hope that was helpful. That was number 3. You don't need an expensive hosting plan right away to get started. Upgrade later, and just produce a normal amount of content that's valuable to your listeners, and then move up from there. Number 4 is this, and I actually touched on this a little bit, and I don't encourage my students to outsource their editing. Now, I know that there's going to be some podcasters out there and definitely some podcast educators who might message me about this, but hear me out. I don't recommend outsourcing your podcast editing unless you 100% have disposable income to do so when you start your podcast, period. Here's why I don't recommend that. It's going to cost you hundreds of dollars per month. If you're producing 1 episode per week, that's at minimum 4 episodes per month, sometimes 5, because we have 5-week months at some points of the year. And it's going to cost you hundreds of dollars to get 4 to 5 episodes a month edited and, ID3 or tagged and all of that. Is it worth it once you start doing it? 1000%. It's totally worth it. I definitely encourage people to outsource when they're ready, but podcasting costs money in the beginning anyway. And if you don't have hundreds of dollars of disposable income to put towards outsourcing, either from your business or from a business savings account, or from, again, disposable income that you are able to invest in your business or your podcast, it's going to be really hard for you to come up with those funds. So here's what I recommend instead. Number 1, I recommend investing in a decent microphone. The ATR 2100 is one of those. Invest in a nice windscreen for your ATR 2100. This all helps with sound, right? And look up ways that you can make your podcast recording space more conducive to excellent sound. Don't record next to a window, especially if you live by an airport or a train track. The closet thing, you might have thought that was a joke, but it's really not. A lot of amazing podcasters still podcast in their closet because it's great for acoustics, because your clothes are hanging up on the walls. So it's an amazing, amazing way to get good sound without having to invest a ton in, audio editing and things of that nature. And set some ground rules for your guests. If you are an interview-based show, if you are not going to be editing podcasts, so whether you're going to do it yourself or maybe you're not going to edit too much, set some ground rules for your guests. I know I have those when my guests get my automated email confirmation that their interview has been booked. Within that email confirmation, it says, I don't accept interviews over the phone. You have to wear headphones. If you have a microphone, you have to use it. And I just give them tips. Don't record in a room with a wood floor. Try to be on carpet. And all of my guests are really appreciative of that. So you'd be surprised what people will appreciate. So if you're not going to get editing, I totally understand. And I hear you on that. I don't think you should unless you can truly afford it. And then as you become more able to outsource, definitely get editing. And if you need a recommendation, if you're listening and you're like, Kinsey, I'm there. I have plenty of money to outsource. I'm ready to outsource. I need an outsourcing company. Just shoot me an email at yourpodcastgirl@gmail.com and I'll give you some recommendations for people you can contact to edit your podcast for you. And congratulations on getting to that point. All right. The fifth and final thing I don't think you need to waste your money on when you're just getting started podcasting is this is actually more of your time. I really don't feel like you should spend hours, days, weeks, and months trying to piece together information on the internet to try to start a podcast. It is a waste of time because there's so much good training out there. There's so many great courses. And yeah, I have one too. I'm not afraid to say that. And of course I'm biased. I do think people should buy a course. But here's the thing. I created my course to let people spend time elsewhere. You need to spend your time, the majority of your time, creating quality content for your audience. What you need to not do is spend hours and hours and hours on YouTube trying to piecemeal together how to start a podcast when you could just get it all in one fell swoop. My course is certainly not the only one that exists. There's a lot of great courses out there. Pat Flynn has a course. I have a course that I've learned from industry giants who have courses as well. So feel free to get any of those courses, but it's just so nice to be able to log into one place, get the step-by-step information that you need so that you can hit publish on your podcast instead of trying to say, oh, did I do this step? Did I do that step? Just get a step-by-step course, get a step-by-step book, an ebook, I don't care what it is. So that way you can just follow from step 1 to step 20 and be done with it. And now your podcast is live on all of the major podcast players. I hope that was helpful. Let me run through these 5 things really quick. Don't waste your money on these 5 things. Number 1 is an expensive microphone. Number 2 is a sound mixer. You don't need one of those at the beginning. Number 3 is a really expensive hosting plan. Don't, overextend yourself and overpromise and underdeliver to yourself. Just release 1 episode per week to start. You can always move up. And that means you don't need a hosting plan that is more than probably $15 or $20 a month. Number 4 is not investing in outsourcing your podcast editing right away unless you have the disposable income to do so. It's expensive. It will be hundreds of dollars, even if you're only releasing 1 episode per week. So edit it yourself. Do what you can on the front end to make quality sounding podcast. If you need help with that, let me know. And then you'll have less editing anyway. And then you will be able to move on once your podcast has started generating more leads, once it's starting to make money for your business, for your career, and you're generating revenue that way, then you can start diverting some of that revenue to editing and outsourcing that part of your podcast. And finally, I really don't think you should take your life away and trying to piecemeal together a podcast. Grab a course, whether it's mine or someone else's, to just teach you step 1 through whatever. And so you can hit publish on your podcast and not waste a bunch of time on YouTube and then crossing your fingers that you checked all the boxes. I hope that was helpful today. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you, and we will see you in the next episode. Take care.